Hello, I am Doreen Steenland, your host. Today's guest is Meg Leddy. Meg, why don't we just jump in? And I'd love to ask you what got you started on this passion with your podcast?
Yeah, it really happened for me. I ended up doing a podcast for a group of I ended up doing a podcast for a group that was I had presented at. And so once I did their podcast, I said, you know what, I really like this. I really like doing podcasts. And so I said, I really need to get this message out there. And my message for the podcast is when I was my most burned out, you feel like you don't have time to breathe.
Mm.
And I didn't have anybody to go to because at that point, my relationships were kind of crumbling, or I shouldn't say were kind of crumbling. They were crumbled. And I didn't have anybody to turn to. I didn't have any resources. I didn't know where to go to find what I needed. And when you feel like you can't breathe, you don't feel like you have any time to figure out how to get out of this hole that I felt like I was in. And that was the onus for the podcast, was really giving people that are so busy, that are so stressed, that feel like they can't breathe, giving them really solid, very small things that they can integrate into their day to help them feel better. And that has been well received. It has been, people have reached out to me and said, these are the things that I needed. I don't need somebody telling me I need to meditate for an hour, because none of us have time to meditate for an hour. We don't need that. We need small things that we can put into our day that actually move the needle.
Yes, so good. Thank you for sharing that. So let's just talk a moment for that period of time when you were in that state of burnout. What did that look like? You said not being able to breathe, but
Yeah.
there had to be more symptoms that led up to that maybe you were ignoring.
Yeah. What's really interesting about burnout is that it's insidious. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And we are really good at ignoring our bodies. I mean, especially I was in CT surgery at the time. I would go into surgery for 7 or 8 hours at a time. So I was really good at ignoring what my body needed, because if I was hungry or I had to go to the bathroom, I ignored it. So I was really good at that. And so when my body started giving me signs, I ignored them. And I actually just thought it was the normal aging process. I thought my back hurts because that's just normal. I stand in the OR for several hours every day. I got some weird rashes, and the dermatologists were like, we don't know why you're having these rashes. I just chalked it up to nothing. I mean, I just figured I had rashes. I had all sorts of different things. One of the things that I had, and there was about a period of time of 6 months where I had a car accident. I fell down the stairs and hurt my foot. And I had had reflux for a long, long time, and it was getting worse and getting worse. And I finally went in and got an EGD, and the doctor came out. I work at a major medical institution. The doctor came out and said, is there something on your chart I'm missing? And I said, no. And he said, because I don't see this in immune competent patients. He goes, you have yeast in your esophagus. I flew right over my head. I didn't even think about it. I said, well, what can we do about it? He goes, I'll give you an antifungal for 7 days. You'll be fine. Back to work the next day. It wasn't until after that I was able to take some deep breaths and was able to kind of look back on this, that this was all burnout manifesting in my life. When I had my car accident, I thought I was fully paying attention to the road, but my brain was so offline that I just hit the car in front of me. When I fell down the stairs, again, I thought I was fully there. I wasn't. I had left chicken in the oven that was burning. I was trying to do 17 things. All of these were building up, and it came to a head, and it really came to a head one day. I was at work in a bathroom stall in a heaping pile of mess. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this anymore. And that's when I decided to make some changes. And at that point, it was really tough to make those changes. My kids thought I was going to yell at them every time I opened my mouth. My husband didn't want to be in the same room with me. I didn't have any friends left because I didn't have the energy or time for friends. And I really, at that point, when I was like scrolling on my Facebook feed, I kind of looked back at the pictures I was taking. I was taking pictures of things like t-shirts that say like, I hate humans. I love humans. It was just the burnout talking,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yes.
every time I went to the grocery store, I got mad because somebody'd be in the way, or, somebody wouldn't park correctly, or, I was carrying all of this anger. I mean, anger was like the emotion I had the most of. And it was, it felt bad. It felt really bad. And it just wore me out. And that's where I was. And it was not a good place to be.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. First of all, I am so sorry that you went through that. But what I want to say is, and you know this, that you are not alone
No.
in what you are experiencing. And so many medical professionals are walking around right now in that same space where they are living and like you said, mastering survival mode. You have mastered survival mode. And guess what? Your brain was not intended to stay there long term,
No.
right? We weren't wired like that. So the effects that you were experiencing obviously were from the chronic cortisol running, the adrenaline, all of the hormones running through your body, all of the chemicals from the not processing emotions, not being able to think clearly, being short tempered, almost chronic dysregulation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens in your brain. And then what happens when we continue this way for so long is that these pathways become really well worn in your brain, and you
Mm-hmm.
don't even realize it. It becomes your normal.
Yeah. And I was living in a bubble where that was everybody's normal.
Yes.
Everybody I came in contact with, had headaches or backaches on a regular basis, had reflux. Relationships were falling apart. It was very normal in CT surgery for people to be divorced or not have good relationships. That was the norm. I didn't think I was outside of the norm in functioning in that bubble.
Yes. So good what you said about highlighting the relationships also, because when we shift into survival mode, we go offline relationally.
Yeah.
We are not connecting with other humans. We are trying to escape them. We are trying to push them away. And as you said, those t-shirts that you were taking pictures of, right? About hating humans, that is what manifests after living in this space of really shutting off the switch to the relational part of your brain.
Yeah.
And you don't have to live like that, right?
No, no. And I am here to be like, I am the one that would have said, when you told me when I was burnt out, if you had said, you can live a healthier life, you can wake up and actually want to get out of bed in the morning, I would have been the first one to tell you, absolutely not. That's not possible. And I am here to tell you it is possible.
Wow. Yes. And so practically speaking, um, what happened in your relationships? I know you said you were short tempered. Was there anything else that you noticed coming up for you?
Oh, yes. So no patience, very short tempered, very judgmental. I mean, whew. And what's really interesting to me is that in the operating room, we function on efficiency. Every move we make, we
Mhm.
don't do extra moves. And so when I came home, I expected home to run the same way as the operating room because that was my environment. And so if I could be doing one thing and my husband could be doing one thing and we could do them at the same time so that then we got finished earlier, that was my expectation.
Mhm.
And that you cannot bring an operating room efficiency into your house, especially with small children. I expected the same out of them. My expectations were totally off, but that's how my brain got wired for so many years. And so I had completely unrealistic expectations of what was going to happen when I walked in the door. And my poor family paid the price for that.
Sorry. I am really sorry. And that is the case over and over again. I love what you said about the judgment piece. Because the judgment, that judgy voice that condemns yourself, others, and your circumstances, and it's a global phenomenon right now, is one of the key symptoms that you're functioning in survival mode, right? If you are chronically judgy and nitpicking and overreacting to everyday stimuli, chances are you are living in survival mode, because that's where all the negative emotions come from, that side of the brain, right?
I read a great book that said there's no way that you'll be able to release judgment on other people until you release it for yourself.
Wow. Yeah.
And that struck me really hard, because I didn't realize that when I was judging somebody else, it was because I was judging myself at the same time. Hard to explain. But once I saw that pattern, once I said, this is something I judge myself about,
Yes.
that's where it showed up when I started judging other people. And so I really had to give myself some self-love and really start working on what I was judging myself on. And guess what? Those judgments stopped for me judging other people, which was really interesting.
Yes. And so let's talk about that self-love, because people think it's like this woo-woo stuff and
Yeah.
we have to go to the spa and all that, but we know that that's not the case. So let's just flesh that out a little bit if we can.
Yeah. So it actually took me about 2 years into what I call my journey to be receptive enough to self-compassion and reading about self-compassion. So it took me a while until my brain was even receptive enough to hear those terms and start looking into it. But what's really interesting about it is the statistics are that people that are more successful have more self-compassion for themselves. And I would have thought that was the opposite, especially for medicine. I felt like if I wasn't the biggest critic to myself, if I made a mistake, I had to remember it and I had to criticize myself and I had to feel awful about it. That's not the case. Actually, there's a big difference between shame and guilt, which I learned along this way too. And I was shaming myself for making mistakes. And what that does is it keeps you from growing and learning from those mistakes. So I was saying, I'm a bad PA. I'm a bad person. I can't believe I did that. That doesn't help me grow and learn. What helps me grow and learn is guilt that says, I did something bad, but next time I won't, because I'm going to learn and grow from this. And I'm going to ask people about this. And I'm going to talk about this to spread the word so that nobody else does the same mistake that I did. They can learn from my mistakes. So shame and guilt were a big lesson for me. And I was really shaming myself a lot. And when I started moving that over to guilt and then some self-compassion with that, that really changed how I walked into not only being a mom and a spouse, but being a PA. It really changed my whole world.
Wow. Wow. And just a little because I'm a neuroscience geek, I'm going to keep going back to the
Yes.
So, what's happening there with the judgment keeps you condemning yourself and criticizing yourself and others. And what you did was you kind of shifted to a place of empathy and compassion to yourself, which is a totally different pathway in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could get ourselves to pause and take a few deep breaths and see other humans in our path as human beings, as people who are learning and growing, then we can get to that empathy pathway in our brain and actually have that growth mindset that you're talking about. Because we all make mistakes. There is no perfection. There is no perfection. And that whole concept of having empathy for yourselves and it interfering with your success is a lie that we believe. because
Yes.
for so many years that 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 pushing mentality has gotten you where to the success that you have.
Mhm.
So we think in our brains that we have to judge ourselves harshly, judge others harshly, and judge our circumstances harshly in order to continue to be successful. And that is not true.
No.
If you tap into that empathy, you can still have high standards and hold those standards up for yourself and others and your work, but with a growth mindset where you are looking at the possibilities, you're looking at how we could do this better and more efficiently, how we can work together to make things um, run more smoothly, right? And that's a relational connection that you have with the people that you're in relationship with, right?
Exactly.
And it changes everything,
It does. It does.
everything.
It changes how you see the world, and it does open you up to possibilities where I used to ruminate all the time on the same things. And again, I think it's those brain connections. Those brain connections are very strong and will keep you in that cycle. And if you can switch over to a new brain pathway, you do have to practice a little bit. You do have to kind of tell yourself. But if you do start growing that pathway gets to be a superhighway.
Yeah,
And then the path of the negative, the path of that rumination, that shame gets smaller.
yeah,
And it's easier than you think to do these, to make that move. And I thought it was going to be really hard. I was really negative, and I thought it was going to be just completely outside of what I had always thought and the way my brain had functioned. But it's a it's a flip, and you can do it.
yeah. So I love that. What was the first step you think that got you to acknowledge that you needed to make that shift, that pathway change?
There were lots of things. um, I think for me, when I recognized it was I learned about positive emotions. So, 7 positive emotions.
Yes.
These can rewire your brain very powerfully. And
Yes.
the way it came in for me was when I made the decision to start doing something for myself. And I made the decision to choose me. I made a healthy shake in the morning. It sounds kind of funny, but it
Yeah.
took about 30 seconds. I could work it into my day. It
Yes.
was healthy. It carried me through my OR, so I felt full. It gave me all my veggies for the day, so I was growing my gut microbiome.
Mhm.
So it was doing all these things. But the other thing it did is that it came along with this app, and you posted every time that you had your shake, and people would literally applaud you. They would say, "Great job.
Uh-huh.
Awesome job getting your shake in
Yeah.
today."
Yeah.
I had never received feedback like that in my entire life
Mhm.
for saving people's lives. But yet, drinking a shake in the morning, I was getting great feedback for.
Wow.
And just that 30 seconds and those little teeny great jobs was
Mhm.
enough to start rewiring my brain and to see that there was another way. And if you think about that, it probably took 1 minute a day of doing that to set me on my path to then build on that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what I'm seeing there is there was this relational positive feedback.
Mm-hmm.
There was appreciation, there was gratitude. These are all this pathway that leads us to joy and peace and
Yes.
calm and confidence. Confidence, guys, you want more confidence? Judging doesn't get you there, right?
Correct.
You get there through that empathy pathway and the joy switch that we get to turn on. And I love that. That is so powerful that one little app made that difference for you in 1 minute a day.
Yeah. It's incredible. And when I look back on it, I it amazes me how again it comes down to brain science.
Yes.
And this company knew how to tap into it.
Yes. So what it was doing also is giving you that little dopamine hit,
Hmm.
keep you going, right? Same thing with streaks. When we are on a streak and we get to click off a button, that's why those habit trackers are so huge in making lasting change. because it gives us that little dopamine hit, the reinforcement, and it keeps us going on the pathway. That's awesome.
Yeah, it really was cool.
Wow. So, tell me about meditation. What I know you're busy, but
No,
does that fit in at all?
I make time for it every day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard to find time for it every day, but I do 15 minutes. If I can do a little more, I do. If I can't, then I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But I do 15 minutes every morning. And I have a little app and I turn on these very soothing sounds of rain.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it grew for me was I started some breathing exercises.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that is very little known about me is that I suffered from pulmonary emboli.
Oh, wow.
And again, I think it was part of stress and burnout and all of that. But so I started doing some breathing exercises because I felt like my lung function wasn't where it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I started with some breathing exercises. And before the breathing exercises, they were very powerful breathing exercises. Before the breathing exercises, I wanted to be in a calm state because I knew that when I was in a calm state entering into these breathing exercises, it went better for me
Yes.
because the breathing exercises did allow me some time to bring up some old stuff, which I definitely am dealing with through therapy and other things. But I knew when I started being calm going into those exercises that it went better. And so I started taking a few minutes before just to kind of calm my brain and be silent before I did those. And that's what led me to meditation, where it ended up being longer and longer. And even 15 minutes, I'm like, oh, I just wish I could stay here a little longer. When I tried to do meditation prior to that
Mm-hmm.
with different apps, it didn't work for me. I didn't understand how to shut my brain down until I got to that point. And it's been a really powerful tool for me because oftentimes I'm in therapy and oftentimes I will go to my therapist and say, this is what came up for me during my meditation. And
Mm-hmm.
he says, it's so great that you're doing this because you're becoming more in tune with what is coming up and what needs to be dealt with in order for you to thrive and work through these things.
Yes. So good. And the whole concept of meditation doesn't necessarily have to be emptying your mind and stopping,
No.
right? Our minds are so busy and active, right? It's like squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. And you just keep coming back to this place where you can recenter and recalm yourself. And by starting with those deep breaths, I know it might not have been intentional, but it's brilliant because what you're doing is if you take deep belly breaths, you're actually activating that vagus nerve to slow your system down and say, okay, the threat is over, we can relax now,
Mm-hmm.
right? And your brain doesn't know the difference
Yep.
whether you're facing a real threat or an imagined threat. So anytime that anxiety or those feelings start to come up, even if you're just simply at a patient's bedside and you take a few really big, deep belly breaths, that can change just about everything.
Yes. Your brain will then say, oh, wait, because of those belly breaths, there is no stress. That
Yes.
stress is gone.
Yeah.
And your body relaxes. I didn't know about any of this stuff, but when I got in the car and I was really, really upset after a day, I would crank some music
Mm-hmm.
and I can't sing. I wish I could sing, but I would yell the music. And what I didn't know what I was doing was firing that diaphragm, taking really deep breaths. And I always noticed after I did that, I felt better.
Mm.
And I really do think it was my body releasing that stress, saying, oh, the stress is gone because our diaphragm is firing. She's taking deep breaths. Oh, we're letting go of that stress of the day. It was ingenious. I had no idea I was doing it, but it really helped. And I kept doing it because it really helped.
Awesome. So, what parting wisdom do you have for us as we start to near the end of our call here?
The one thing I would say, there's actually two things. I would say it doesn't take much to put things into your day that can help you. And if I'm talking to you and you feel like you can't breathe, there are little tiny things that take seconds, maybe a minute that you can welcome into your day that will help you walk through your day better and feel better. They literally will help your body feel better. The other thing that I would say is, and the thing that's helped me, I keep going back to time and time again, is finding out what your core values are. And before I did an exercise to find out my core values, it was like I kept running away from what I didn't want, but I wasn't running towards anything. And so now that I know my core values, I'm running towards what I do want, and my life is actually changing towards that. But without that knowledge, and nobody sits you down and tells you this in college or in graduate school, like you need
Right.
to know your core values.
Yes.
I kept running away. I just wasn't running towards. And so I think that is a big shift for me that really, really helped me.
That's amazing. And that's exactly what coaching does, right?
Yes.
Coaching gives you that space to explore these things that nobody has ever, you don't have time to think about.
Yeah.
If you don't make that space, like you're in counseling right now, and that creates that space for you to slow down a little bit and think about some of the things that are important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Think about where you really want your life to go and what legacy you want to leave for your family, right? We
Yeah.
don't have that space. When we get home from work, we're like, done,
Yep.
fried. I'm just burnt out. I'm sitting on the couch. I'm vegging out, right? How many times have you said that to yourself as you turned on the TV and just laid there like, right? That's not the time to do that.
No,
Exploration, right?
it's not.
We need to create that space for us. That's part of that self-care that we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about, right?
Yep.
So knowing your values change pretty much the direction that you can move towards
Mm-hmm.
instead of staying stuck in one place.
It also gave me a great way to say no, which I was
Yes.
really bad at. But now when people ask and I say, I'm sorry, I'm putting my energy into going along with my core values, they don't have an answer to that. They
Yes.
don't come back and say, but I'm like, no, no,
Yes. Yes.
it's a very simple no for me.
So good. So having those core values has allowed you to really learn to set better boundaries also. Yeah. So good. So good. So any other parting words before we leave here today, Meg?
Just that I want people that are listening to this and watching this to know that you're not alone. And medicine is really hard right now. And there's a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
And I just want you to know that there is another side and you can get there. And I'm living proof of it. So reach out. Please reach out if you need anything. Please reach out to a peer, to a friend, to a counselor, a safe space. Please reach out if you're struggling because it is really, really hard in medicine right now. And there are lots of resources for you. I am sure that your institution probably has some, but there are lots of stuff out there online, podcasts. I mean, I started going to books. There are things that can help.
Yes. So good. And there's no shame in that.
No.
There's no shame in that at all. That is what we would encourage our patients to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, when we don't do it for ourselves, we're being hypocritical in a sense. So, yeah, get the help if you need the help.
Yeah. And
Meg,
that's why I come on and say, I'm so open and honest about it. I'm going to therapy. I'm working through my stuff. I'm doing all this because we need more people to talk about this.
yes. And Meg, we've all got stuff.
We've all got stuff.
We've all got stuff. We all come into life with a whole bunch of baggage, right? And if we walk around with that baggage on our back the whole time, life gets heavy. We get weighed down.
Yeah.
And that's part of the beauty of having counseling or coaching, or counseling is really looking back, coaching is looking forward, right?
Future, yeah.
And so that's the difference between the two there. But being able to let those bags off and change the way you see your world and the direction you want to go in is just a powerful thing that you can take your power back by doing those things.
Absolutely.